Coming up tonight on YCN News, primary day in Vermont comes tomorrow for residents to vote for a number of key issues and high-profile races. A man from Enfield, New Hampshire bike rides for the Make-A-Wish charity. And the Democratic National Committee votes to keep New Hampshire as the first in the nation presidential primary state. For more news, weather, and sports, it's time for YCN, your local view.
Now, your daily digest of the Dartmouth Lake Sunapee region, southern Vermont, and Windsor County. News, sports, weather, and all that is happening in our area. The news on YCN, your local view.
Good evening, and welcome to this Monday edition of YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. It's primary day in Vermont tomorrow, when residents registered to vote will ask for a Republican or Democratic ballot at their local polling site. The results of tomorrow's races will determine the final slate of candidates for the general election November 4th. Along with the high-profile races for governor, lieutenant governor, state legislators, and the U.S. House of Representatives, voters will decide issues key to their town. For example, in Wethersfield. I'm at the Wethersfield Proctor Library in Ascutney, Vermont, that has been undergoing some expansion since 2000. In March at the town meeting, the vote to spend over $1 million on the expansion failed. Now, the plan has been reduced by $200,000, and tomorrow voters can approve or deny this new plan. There is a time limit on the project, as the building must be completed by January 28th of 2015. The vote on the public library in Wethersfield is one local issue YCN News is covering. Another local topic takes us to Bellows Falls, where voters will decide up or down approving a $7 million sewer plan bond. Meanwhile, 3 Republicans seek the chance to challenge Democrat Governor Peter Shumlin for another 2-year term. Steve Barry, Emily Payton, and Scott Milne will wait to see who will win enough votes tomorrow to run against Shumlin November 4th. In the lieutenant governor's race, Progressive Dean Corrin ultimately aims to run against present Lieutenant Governor Republican Phil Scott. Liberty Union candidate Marina Brown hopes to beat Corrin for that chance. U.S. Representative Democrat Peter Welch will wait to see who among 3 GOP challengers he will run against in the November general election. The 3 are Mark Donka, Donald Nolte, and Donald Russell. YCN will bring you the results of Vermont primary races and local election news throughout this week. Please stay tuned. U.S. Senator from New Hampshire Kelly Ayotte says President Barack Obama needs to lead a strategy to defeat ISIS. Ayotte said this yesterday in a nationwide appearance on CBS's Face the Nation.
Obviously, in New Hampshire, the brutal murder of James Foley really brought home this week this threat that it presents to us in our country. And what I think is that a containment strategy is not going to cut it. We need a strategy to defeat ISIS. As the Secretary of Defense has described, it's an imminent threat to us. It's not like nothing we've ever seen in terms of the sophistication of this group, the funding, the territory that they control. And we need a strategy that is going to expand the airstrikes, going to support the Kurds further and the Iraqi forces, but in particular the Kurds, get them the military equipment that they are requesting, and also look at supporting more support and enhancement for the moderate opposition in Syria to deal with the sanctuaries in Syria. We have to do that if we want to defeat ISIS, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said this week. And then I would say also the political solution is important. We need an Iraqi government that's inclusive. We also need Muslim leaders to condemn ISIS, to make sure that they are saying that ISIS has to go. And finally, I think, Bob, we have to address as the Congress where the defense budget is right now, because there's a disconnect with sequester from the threats that we face around the world and the resources we are going to need to fight this threat.
As of yet, neither the President nor Congress have announced additional airstrikes or a defensive plan against the terrorist ISIS. When YCN News returns, we'll continue with more news.
The YCN News continues in a moment.
Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. This vantage point atop Methodist Hill Road, where the town lines of Lebanon and Enfield meet, is a familiar view for cyclist and, yes, budding philanthropist Matthew Steinberg. Now begins a trek for Steinberg, one that will take him and his carbon bike Mozzie up and down of New England's steepest hills and mountains, all in the name of charity. Matthew's training involves 3 hours daily of cycling. He also hikes and runs. Getting around on 2 wheels is his favorite way to help children, especially through the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
I enjoy cycling uphill quite a bit. I had never really been a cyclist up till about 3 years ago, and I had a pretty serious injury, and I was recuperating from that, and kind of spent the summer watching some of the bike races like the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia on TV. And we've had an opportunity to visit a lot of those places in Europe and actually see people not only just riding those passes and races, but they do it in their daily commutes, and it kind of fascinated me. So I thought, well, I'm going to make a goal for my recovery, and that goal is to ride my bike up Mount Washington. And I was able to do that last summer, and so something that I just enjoy doing, and then something that I'm kind of passionate about, which is trying to help out children as much as I can. I doubt if I'll ever be financially fortunate enough to be a philanthropist as much as I would like monetarily, but I can certainly ride a bike, and if people can donate money for that cause, then I'll do it as many times as it takes. I think I have a soft spot for children, and especially I think Make-A-Wish it's a great foundation, because short of finding a cure, I can't think of a better way to have an immediate effect on these children's lives. You think about they always have to be kind of on their game. They can't just relax and be children, and they're fighting these really serious illnesses. There's the emotional and physical pain and stress that goes with that, not just for the kids, but for their families as well. And if you can just, gather some money together and send these kids on, if it's a trip to see the Red Sox, or if it's a trip overseas to see Europe, or even, to be a fireman for a day, just anything that can give them the opportunity and their families the opportunity to just let them be kids, just let them be happy and not have to think about all the stuff that they're going through. I just think it's a wonderful cause.
Matthew needs to raise at least the minimum amount needed to carry out a Make-A-Wish plan, $10,000 to $15,000. Where will he ride? It took planning and persuasion, and in the end he received permission to ride up the highest peak in the Northeast in New England's backyard, Mount Washington.
So I'll be riding up Mount Kearsarge and Ascutney and Akimo. Those are all public roads, and then Whiteface Mountain in New York, which is a public road as well. Mount Washington and Mount Mansfield are privately owned, and so they typically don't open their roads to cyclists. Number one, they're very steep, so it would be dangerous. They're narrow, and there's a lot of cars that go up. And they typically have one race a year, so they'll charge an admission price. They'll close the road down and let people ride up it, but normally they don't have it just open to cyclists. But it took a little convincing, but a little bit of paperwork, a couple of phone calls, some meetings, and they decided to open the road up for me, because they were impressed by the cause and the effort that's going into it. So it'll be great to be able to climb the highest peaks in both Vermont and New Hampshire, and we'll just hope for good weather on Mount Washington.
Follow Matthew on his quest this week on his Facebook page. There you can click the link to make a donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation as well. Along with Mount Washington, New Hampshire is retaining another claim to fame. That's because the Democratic National Committee voted this weekend to keep New Hampshire as the first in the nation presidential primary state. The date for New Hampshire's presidential campaign 2016 primary is set for February 9, 2016. That's 11 days before the Nevada primary, the next state to hold a presidential primary race. The southern Atlantic states of South Carolina and North Carolina follow Nevada. Keep in mind that Iowa will hold its presidential candidate caucuses on February 1st. New Hampshire Governor Maggie Hassan says in a statement that she is very pleased there will be ample time between the Iowa caucus and the Nevada primary for New Hampshire to remain the first state in the nation to hold a presidential primary. The 2016 presidential election is a special one for New Hampshire. It marks the 100th or centenary anniversary of the state's presidential primary. New Hampshire has long been the initial proving ground for presidential hopefuls, says Hassan, because Granite Staters were the first to truly recognize that direct citizen involvement in the nomination process makes for better presidential candidates and better presidents. In other words, retail politics is a great way for presidential hopefuls and voters to get to know one another before the November 2016 election. Hassan thanks New Hampshire members to the DNC for their work to preserve the state's presidential primary status. This includes State Democratic Chairman Ray Buckley, Cornish resident and former state legislator Peter Burling, Joanne Dowdle, Senator Martha Fuller Clark, and Kathy Sullivan, and, says Hassan, especially Secretary of State Bill Gardner. In other New Hampshire political news, candidate for U.S. Senate and former state senator Jim Rubens picked up an endorsement today. Former New Hampshire Executive Councilor Earl Rinker of Manchester says Rubens is the best person to speak for residents' needs in Washington. Rinker says Rubens, unlike his challengers incumbent Democrat Jeanne Shaheen and Republican Scott Brown, is not a career politician. And though Rinker speaks well of former U.S. Senator from New Hampshire Bob Smith, Rinker says Smith has been away from New Hampshire for too long. After leaving the U.S. Senate, Smith retired to Florida. Rubens is a 40-year resident of New Hampshire and the founder of 10 small businesses. His political accomplishments in the state legislature include getting a charter school plan passed for kids. Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. Now, Matt McDonald will have a look at our weather for the next few days and then move on to sports.
Thanks, Rose. Tonight we'll have mostly clear skies with lows around 62 degrees and winds up to 5 miles per hour. Tomorrow will be sunny with highs in the mid-80s and winds between 5 and 10 miles per hour. Tomorrow night we'll have patchy fog after 3 a.m. with clear skies and a low of 59 degrees. Wednesday morning we'll have patchy fog before 8 a.m. Skies will be sunny with a high of 85 degrees and winds up to 10 miles per hour. Wednesday night will be cloudy with lows in the upper 50s. You can see here on the map that we have clear and sunny skies for at least the first half of the week. Now let's see what's coming up on our community calendar. Tomorrow night in Grantham, New Hampshire, the Pavilion at the Park will host Music in the Meadow at 6 p.m. In Windsor, Vermont, the Select Board will meet at 7 p.m. On Wednesday, the Brooks Memorial Library in Brattleboro will show the Screwball Comedy Film Series at 2 p.m. Remember, you can submit local events from your community by sending them to news@ycnnow.com. And now turning to sports, the New Hampshire Fisher Cats had a rather disappointing series this weekend. On Friday, the Fisher Cats began their first game with Portland and lost 4-3. On Saturday, they lost substantially with a score of 7-1. And finally, last night, Portland shut out the Fisher Cats with a final score of 5-0. The Fisher Cats have a chance to redeem themselves tonight with the start of a 4-game series with Harrisburg and Manchester. The game begins at 6:35 p.m.